A couple weeks ago, I made a video talking about how I got into Resident Evil, and although a lot of people noticed I played them in a very unconventional order, I do tend to enjoy games more when I play them like that. Just wait until I talk about Kingdom Hearts in the future. But I did see a lot of people comment asking me to play the original trilogy, people telling me the original Resident Evil 2 had better connections between the two scenarios, and the original Resident Evil 3 having a much better nemesis than the remake. Also, nobody really said anything directly about the original Resident Evil 1, but it just felt kind of wrong if I didn't play the original game and see how the second and third one improved upon it, and overall just see the evolution throughout the entire Resident Evil series, starting from the original trilogy. So I quickly went to work wishlisting the trilogy on GOG and patiently waiting for the summer sale, and in less than a week I got the original trilogy bundle, 3 for the price of 2, so here are my thoughts on the games. Jumping into Resident Evil 1, the first thing that caught my attention was the actors in the opening cutscene. I already knew for a long time about this cutscene, as well as the decision Capcom made to not release this game with a Japanese dub, so the voice acting I'm hearing now throughout the entire game was heard throughout everywhere at launch. However, I'd like to know if the actors who were portraying the characters in live action were the same people voicing them, because I'm not entirely sure. Anyways, after seeing Wesker in his cheese wig, you're popped straight into the mansion. Based on my experience with the 2002 remake, the opening moment in the game was relatively the same. The first difference I noticed was Barry actually kills the first zombie rather than it being just knocked down and running away. Afterwards, when you and Barry split up, and before properly progressing, I think I'd like to take a good look at the entrance for a second. The first thing that caught my attention was the missing door that in the remake would lead you to this long balcony area. Also, to my knowledge, the Trevor family is exclusive to the 2002 remake, so I did not expect to see Lisa or any information on the other family members. But I did think it was kind of weird that the developers still left this area behind the stairs that we could still walk behind. There's nothing really here, so maybe there was a basement planned at one point here and it was just repurposed in the remake, but that's just my assumption. Also, that door that would take you to like this area that leads into the mask room just didn't exist here, so it was pretty obvious from the get-go I would have to be collecting something else that wasn't masks. I just didn't know what it would be. This also put my mind a bit at ease because I realized this probably meant Crimson Heads weren't going to be in this game. I didn't hate the Crimson Heads, I just didn't want to deal with them using these controls, but I'll get to that in a second. Moving on to the next room, I noticed something I honestly did not expect: a stepladder. In the remake, you had to push over a table and climb it to get this item on a statue. Meanwhile, here, you just have to push this stepladder. I have no idea if you could push the table at all. I didn't attempt it. The second I saw a stepladder, I was just like, alright. I didn't question it. I just thought it was kind of weird. This is kind of when I realized that the mechanics and the controls might be a little bit different this time around to what I was used to in the remake. This was the first game in the franchise, and it was also the first game in the franchise to have tank controls. But this one only has tank controls, and I know a lot of people assumed in the last video that I'd have a hard time readjusting to the controls if I were to play these games. The remake, however, does give you the option to play with tank controls if you use the D-pad, so it didn't take me long to get used to them since I had already used the tank controls a lot when I was speedrunning the first game. I'd followed like a guide, and apparently it's really essential that you use this tank control like stair skip. I don't even know how to describe this. However, this game was not made with modern button layouts in mind, so I was consistently hitting the menu or the change control layout button, or just everything I wasn't supposed to be hitting. Apparently it was supposed to be compatible with this like old Microsoft controller I'd never seen before. I've never had one of those controllers that has like the 3 buttons like that. It looks like one of those Sega controllers. I don't know how to use this at all. However, despite that minor inconvenience, I did continue further. And what I played through felt very familiar, and it was kind of comforting just seeing how faithful the remake was from playing the original game. Aside from the small changes between the remake and original, specifically the layouts of some rooms or just some rooms not existing altogether. I think one of the things that threw me off the most was the puzzles. I think the only puzzle that stayed relatively the same throughout both games was the one where you have to put a gem in the eye of a tiger statue. The two that stuck out to me the most, though, in this version of Resident Evil 1 was just the color room puzzle not being a color puzzle. Instead, you're supposed to be looking at these portraits of a person throughout their entire lifetime, from like infancy to like their deathbed, and I don't know, I thought it was a very unique puzzle, and it stuck out in my mind a lot. Also, that one room from the remake that I just irrationally hate, it exists here too, but it's not as bad in my opinion. I think it's, I don't know, why did the remake have to make it spin? It's so stupid. In the remake, you had to spin a statue on like this little platform and then put it back in the right place. In the original, it just involved moving the statue, and it was just, it was kind of simple. It didn't need to. I don't know, it felt more like a hassle in the remake for some reason. I don't know why. I did like the change in that one room with the knights as well, where the knights order and whatever that you had to place them in was replaced with, you know, having to move the knight statues over poisonous gas. Also, I think the room where you had to move these two statues and not get Jill crushed by the walls doesn't exist in the original either. Unless I somehow missed that room, or there's possibly even more room. Oh yeah, there was like one where you had to get like a key, and you had to replace it or like place it back, or else like the spike wall will come after like you and crush you. I just remembered that there were a lot more rooms that weren't there. I think that's really interesting. That wasn't meant to be in the script. I literally just remembered that now. Another thing that's different is that in the remake, to get to the guardhouse, you need to collect the crest medallion things to unlock the door to the courtyard. However, the original has you collect these 4 unique medallions instead. And I was honestly surprised when I realized they kept this exact same puzzle with these medallions in the remake, just in a different part of the estate. And it serves a different purpose. It's to get this magnum revolver in case you didn't get berries, or if you just want a second one. In terms of the enemies, the zombies are just zombies, and for the most part they never change, and the hunters weren't as intimidating. I mean, like, I thought it was kind of hilarious, the fact that in the hunter introduction, instead of just bursting through the door, it slows down and gently opens it. I don't know, I thought that was funny. They were a little bit challenging, but honestly, not really. They would have been more challenging if Jill's grenade launcher wasn't as overpowered as it is. And that also extends to the bosses. I think Plant 42 took about 3 hits, meanwhile Jan took about 4 or 5 during the second encounter. Oh my gosh, wait, I just realized. Were they actually that easy, or did I play in the wrong difficulty? Oh my goodness. I think the one enemy that gave me the most trouble was solely due to the tank controls, and those enemies were like those fast creatures you see in the lab, especially since they jump you from the get-go here. I'm pretty sure in the remake they didn't start chasing you until after you triggered something, and they chase you for like an entire sequence and then you don't really see them again. Those were pretty much all the things that stuck out to me during my time playing this game, plus Lisa's cabin not existing, or that entire little area for that matter. I found this game just pretty fun and charming for what it is, and it being really familiar to what I had already experienced through the remake just made it feel even more comforting to play. But aside from all that, my overall feelings towards the game are pretty positive, but I guess a little bit neutral at the same time. Like, I think it's a really good game, and I think a lot of people should play it. But I can't really criticize it because it's only the first game in the franchise, and later entries have already shown how they improve and build upon and expand all the concepts introduced in the first game through the later entries. To not sound too confusing, I'm pretty much just saying I think it's a good game, and it's a great foundation, and yeah, I do see myself playing this game again in the future. Maybe I'll stream myself playing the Chris route. Who knows? Resident Evil 2, though. My goodness. I was blown away every second of it. I knew next to nothing about the original version jumping into it, aside from just the liquor cutscene, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I started my playthrough as Claire since I was a bit curious as to how different she was in the classic games, especially since a friend of mine hyped up OG Claire for, in his own words, being more badass in the originals. After a brief retelling of the events of Resident Evil 1, the game starts off with a CG cutscene, and within the first few seconds I thought it'd be the same as the remakes. However, instead of going to a gas station, Claire goes to this diner where she's swarmed by zombies, but then gets saved by Leon, who's sporting red hair to my surprise. And again, I thought the rest of the cutscene would play out the same as the remake. However, the only difference here is that there's a zombie chilling in the back of Leon's car. But before it can lunge at the pair, Leon crashes the car, and when the zombie flied through the windshield, post-crash it was really hilarious, but then I later realized that that could have been the duo if they were rammed by the now incoming truck. The entire opening cutscene as a whole just felt so much more intense from beginning to end compared to the remake. When our pair gets separated, instead of making our way straight to the police station, Claire bumps into Kendo's gun shop where we watch him get eaten alive. I like this opening section a lot more because I got to explore more of the city, and compared to the remake, I think the opening section just as a whole was a lot better in terms of learning the controls and getting a hang of everything. Because I mean, what, like the remake was like you walk down 2 blocks and you're there. Also, the backgrounds in this game were really beautifully done, and I love the fixed camera because it emphasized a lot of details in this opening section. Like, there's this one guy who's like stabbed with forks. Also, really small detail, but walking over shattered glass makes a different sound, and I liked that. And later in the game, I thought that that would be something that would like alert a licker or something like that. I don't know why. I thought there'd be like a sound-related mechanic in this one. But after all that, I made my way to the police station. At first, I thought the station would be kind of like Resident Evil 1, where it felt mostly the same with minimal changes. But instead, I was greeted to what I find kind of hard to describe. Everything was, of course, similar to my past experience with the remakes, yet somehow it felt both big and small at the same time. Like, the whole police station had the same layout but seemed objectively smaller, but the pacing made it feel a lot bigger. I think maybe it's because of how the room layouts were in the remake, where almost every room had a way out of it, so there wouldn't really be dead ends. Meanwhile, in the original, not all the rooms connect in the same way, but I don't know, like, maybe I just felt this way in my first playthrough, or maybe it was just the sequences and placements of items and enemy encounters being different that made it feel like this weird big and small feeling at the same time. Like the room you first enter in the remake that's only filled with zombies when you're running out of there, now just being straight up filled with an entire horde of them from the get-go. But what I'm saying about these layouts isn't a complaint, it's just something I found really interesting. Along with another thing I noticed, you can get a glimpse of the liquor a lot earlier through this window, and it actually made me jump. Also, another thing I noticed throughout the entire original trilogy is that you can actually skip the door animations, and I think this is the game where I realized that. Also, I realized that this game has a small handful of ink ribbons, so I had to use them a lot more sparingly than I did in any other game in the franchise. Using ink ribbons has always been such a difficult thing for me ever since I got into the Resident Evil games, because I'm the type of person with the habit of spamming the save button at least 3 times in every game I play, so now I have to be a little bit more cautious about, like, what I'm clicking. Speaking of ink ribbons, every time I got one, it was completely by accident. Resident Evil 1 wasn't that detailed with the backgrounds. To be entirely honest, it was pretty simple, but Resident Evil 2 was just so great, so beautifully detailed that sometimes I even forgot they were pre-rendered images. The backgrounds were just nicely detailed, but because of the detail, it was hard to distinguish what was interactable and what was just background. There was one point in my playthrough where I sweeped through the entire building, at least the part I had access to at the time, and even trying unconventional ways to attempt progression because I couldn't find the one thing I was missing. Like, I tried shooting flame rounds at the fireplace, I tried shooting the glass in the interrogation room, thinking it would shatter to find that one key, which I knew had to be somewhere until I went back to the STAR's office and accidentally clicked on a book that I needed to read in order to progress. It's Chris's diary, and right under it was the unicorn medallion. I was just spamming the interact button on random things until I found it. Anyways, right before I left the STAR's office, there was a fax machine that went off sending documents about some Chief Irons lore, and I was a bit shocked because I already knew a little bit about Chief Irons. Like, obviously in the remake he was a creep, but I was not expecting what I did here. Anyways, I used the medallion, got the spade key, and then I called it for a night, a little bit earlier than usual since the next few days for me were going to be a bit busy. But the day before recording, my dumbass accidentally changed all the audio settings. So there are 2 bad recordings where I either sound like I'm underground with a really bad webcam mic, or another one where the game audio just is non-existent. I was upset for reasons I'll share a little bit later. Moving forward, we meet Sherry. I thought it was kind of funny that she vented into the next room because she was scared of Claire, and instead of finding her in the next room, we find Leon, who I also thought was really funny because of the fact he didn't stop the literal child from running into a zombie-infested building. One thing that I really liked was in the next room, where you still have this bookcase sliding puzzle like I saw in the remakes, except in the originals, you're supposed to move them into specific positions so you can unlock a piece of another puzzle, rather than just using them as a walkway to get to the 3rd floor like in the remakes. Which, if you want to be technical, the 3rd floor doesn't really exist in this game. It's more like a balcony that just gets you to the clock room. Also, I'm not sure if I need to say it, but yes, I am enjoying the game so far, and at this point I was honestly starting to like the pacing here more than I did in the remake, to the point where I was starting to actually consider this original version overtaking the remake spot as my second favorite Resident Evil game. And you know, I may not have grown up with a PlayStation, but I did grow up with my dad's Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64, so the character models and the graphics in a sense kind of took me back to that time growing up with my dad's low poly games, and honestly I thought it was just really charming, and I wish I grew up with the Nintendo 64 version of this game. Moving forward, I got the lighter for the fireplace puzzle. I passed by this awful room filled with crows that I genuinely hated, but then after that I pretty much followed followed the same sequence as I did in the remake. Finding the valve, spraying water on the burning helicopter, and this was when I kind of looked back and realized, like, there is no underground section under the police station that's unlocked with the statue. But I quickly moved past that thought and instead just started ranting in the recording about me really hating Adobe and the toxic relationship between Adobe, and me liking DaVinci Resolve. This video is not sponsored, but I thought it was really funny, as well as it being lost amongst the muffled sounding footage. Literally, the most anger I got out of that entire playthrough was just me ranting about Adobe. The game itself wasn't even as frustrating. Anyways, putting out the fire unlocks a room where you can get the diamond key and a piece of a block puzzle, but the helicopter itself is still blocking a doorway, so I have to find a way of blowing it up. There was a lot of back and forth between rooms until I finally found the part of the explosive I needed so that I can progress the game. Honestly, I don't think it should have taken me so long to find it. I think it was just because I wasn't used to the different layout in the original. Also, the same issue as earlier, as not knowing what was interactable and what wasn't. Someone in the comments is going to say, oh, this is just a yellow paint issue that people who play modern games have. To that I say no. I mean, growing up with Ocarina of Time, some buildings had pre-rendered backgrounds, but it was really obvious what was able to be touched and what was just part of the background, because there was actual depth to the items, just like Resident Evil 1 did. But again, I attribute this issue to the amazing backgrounds in the game, and just the items themselves blending in so well and not really sticking out as much as they should. I think Resident Evil 3 and Resident Evil 1 make them pop out a lot more. Anyways, we meet Chief Irons, and I was honestly surprised he acknowledged the dead woman on his desk as the mayor's daughter, because that was a detail I had to Google when I played the remake. Other than that, he didn't really threaten Claire, like I was honestly expecting he would, but instead he played this whole innocent card saying he totally didn't murder the woman on his desk that was locked in this hallway with only him the entire time. Anyways, we briefly reunite with Sherry in the taxidermy room, but she says that she's constantly on the run because there's a monster that keeps chasing her. Chief Irons is no longer in his office, but he left behind a heart key along with his diary where he admitted to hunting down the remaining survivors in the police station. When I read that for the first time, I was honestly disappointed in the remake for failing to reach this level of feeling disturbed and creeped out by the type of character they were trying to write, because now I look at Remake Irons and I think it's just a failed version of trying to replicate this. My dumbass was fighting the urge to call him a bad re-application. I'm not trying to bash on the remake because I still really love it and I enjoyed it a lot, and I can go back and replay the remake just as much as the original, and I'm not saying they're bad, but it just feels like the writing and the pacing of the game just felt a lot better in the original, at least to me. The underground area in this game is the next place you have to go to, but it's found a little bit differently than it is in the remake. You actually have to find all these little block puzzle pieces and place them inside of like these opening holes right behind Iron's desk. But in order to get the last piece, you actually have to reunite with Sherry, play as her for a little bit to get the club's key. I thought it was going to be a stealth section like in the remake, but now the developers put Sherry in this like scarier situation by having her run through like multiple zombie dogs and honestly almost dying. But the section is very brief, and we quickly go back to playing as Claire and unlock the remaining doors in the police station to get the final wall puzzle, and then we make our way underground into Chief Iron's taxidermy lair. He got killed by this big thing that in turn killed me later on because I forgot to bring the grenade launcher into the boss fight, or at least I thought they were the same creature. It wasn't until reviewing the footage later that I realized Irons died similarly to in the remake. It was all due to Birkin, and the boss we fight instead was this creature called G-Adult. G-Adult was a common enemy in the sewers of the remake, but here you could see him guarding the way for Claire and Sherry to progress into the sewers. After defeating him and progressing, we immediately upon entering the sewers get a glimpse of Birkin walking around with a pipe, and Sherry gets taken by the currents of the sewer water, and now we are to find Sherry again. We also run into Annette, who believes Claire is another spy sent by Umbrella, trying to steal the G-Virus, but opens up to Claire after learning she's been taking care of her daughter. From this conversation alone, I liked this version of Annette, as well as her later interactions with Leon in the other playthrough. Honestly, the remake did a really good job giving more depth to characters like Marvin and Kendo when in the originals they only had about one scene of dialogue. Meanwhile, Annette is supposed to be more of an important character. I mean, she is the one who tells you the whole story about how Birkin became how he is now, but it feels like there's 3 different versions of her. The remake gave you the calculated and concerned mother for Claire's half, and then the slightly cocky but mostly paranoid scientist in Leon's half. And that's not even taking into account the inconsistencies between the remake scenarios. However, in the original, she felt like one person simply because there weren't any contradictions between the character's behavior and her interactions in the two scenarios. In the original, she's kind of like a heartbroken person, losing her husband and wanting to protect his work from getting in the wrong hands. Also, I hated Birkin's death scene in the remake. Annette just like stood there, disappointed and in disbelief. That's the type of feeling that scene gave off to me. But in the original, she's just heartbroken, sad that she's lost her family, and she still cares for him and has hope for him despite the fact he became just this mindless monster and also infected their daughter later on. Sorry, I think I'm just rambling a bit too much now about Annette. Like, after playing this game, it just gave me more reason to hate that really bad movie vibe I kept getting from my first experience through the remake. Honestly, I just hated the overall performance, the characterizations of Ada and Annette, and honestly the story's overall pacing. I feel like I got a better experience out of the original. Rewinding back a bit to the start of the game, if you play as Leon, it starts the story off in the city, where Leon is surrounded by zombies, until you run into Claire. After the pair split up, Leon takes a different route to the police station, instead entering from the back, and mainly exploring the east wing of the police station at the start while Claire explores the west. After a brief encounter with Mr. X and exploring a little bit more of the police station, Leon makes his way to the west side, where Leon first encounters Sherry running away and then Claire soon after. It's a bit hard to describe, but Leon's side of the story actually makes it feel like a cohesive narrative from just these small little interactions harkening back to your time playing as Claire. Leon's story also reveals how things came to be in Claire's side of the story, like Leon's encounter with Birkin shows how he got the pipe that you later see him with in like Claire's side, but aside from that, Leon and Claire pretty much explore the same areas. But what made it feel better was that it took place at different times. Because of that, you could hypothetically pinpoint the location of each of the protagonists in every moment of the game, and it made it feel a lot more natural and well written compared to what I experienced in a remake. Just to verify this, I did a bit of digging online, and you can perfectly line up the character cutscenes for both Claire and Leon's playthrough, as well as the opposite, where you do Leon first and then Claire second. Oh, but of course, before I forget, I should talk about one of my biggest issues when getting into this game. Ada. For those who don't know from my last video, you know I hated her in the remake. Her character just felt kinda shallow, her relationship with Leon felt really unnatural, so I didn't know what to expect aside from people telling me that the original Ada was a lot better. And they were right. There was no bullshit FBI cover-up or bad acting. From the start, the remake made her seem just so suspicious. But in the original, she's looking for her boyfriend, and it's later confirmed by Annette when she realizes Ada was dating her old coworker that Annette isn't aware of Ada's true identity, thus giving Ada a bit more of an alibi. So she didn't directly treat original Ada with the same hostility as she did in the remake either, except for that one scene if she has Sherry's necklace. Either way, Annette's alibi, that detail alone was enough for Ada to just not seem whoa. It was enough for Ada to not seem suspicious. I'm so sorry about that stutter, my gosh. Either way, I spent the next hour with Ada both in cutscene and as my partner who'd help me fight off zombies, to the point where I honestly, as the player, felt like I could trust her, and I literally forgot that she was a spy, until Annette revealed the truth later, that Ada was only dating John to leak information, and that she's in reality a mercenary spy, and Leon's reaction felt a lot more natural because he actually spent time with Ada than in the remake, and the betrayal feels right. He feels rightfully betrayed, unlike the remake where he's just kind of blindly following her. Also, after doing the 2 scenario playthroughs, I think I realized why Annette's character was so messed up in the remakes. Like, at this point, she's literally losing it because shit keeps hitting the fan. Her infected husband now infected their daughter, there's a spy running around, a tyrant also prowling about, and I just kind of realized that I've been telling the story in a very weird order that doesn't make sense to people who haven't played the game. Yes, I am disgusted with myself. You should totally play the game on GOG. I am so sorry. Anyways, to not lose track of what I've been talking about this whole time because I ramble too much, original Ada good, remake Ada bad, Annette is losing her shit and genuinely needs help. Anyways, while Claire was down in the sewers and rescued Sherry, they find a tram car that takes them down to the labs. Claire leaves Sherry in the waiting room so she can go look for a cure since her father infected her. Meanwhile, Ada and Leon are right behind them, calling the tram car back up so that they can make their way down, except they get attacked by Birkin. Leon fights him off until he retreats, and Leon also goes to look for Annette, but he gets chased by Mr. X, eventually leading into a fight where Ada gets knocked out into some sort of control module and seemingly dies. And honestly, as epic and dramatic as the remake's death of Ada was, and I honestly kind of liked it, the setup of this, along with Leon screaming her name in such a sorrowful way, honestly hit me so much harder. Also, the death felt a lot more real to me than the remake did it, so I honestly thought she was dead. I forgot she was supposed to survive this, but the setup made her actually feel like she would have died from that. And to the people who say, oh, but the remake, she fell off like this giant thing and fell down into an underground pit, you feel like oh, like you thought she wouldn't die from that. There is a rule where if you do not see a character die on screen, they could always come back. Leon is holding her in a way that makes her look like she's a corpse. Of course I thought she was dead. Of course it seemed more realistic. But going back to Claire, we actually see that Ada being knocked into that control module caused the whole lab to enter the self-destruct sequence at the same time. She also gets in contact with Leon and tells him to pick up Sherry from the waiting room. Leon takes Sherry to a train, and as he brings power to it, gets attacked by Mr. X one final time, and with the help of Ada, ends him for good with one rocket launcher blast. Claire, however, had the misfortune of having to take on 2 forms of Birkin all on her own. However, she does eventually make it to the train and administers the cure to Sherry, who is now safe. However, Birkin hitched a ride, and now they have to fight the Birkin Wall, or the Wall of Flesh, whatever. What do you even call this? I don't actually know the name of the Birkin Wall. I just call him the Birkin Wall. I actually died to the Birkin Wall about 2 times because I underestimated his power, but after you beat him, everyone lives happily ever after, except for all the people who died in Raccoon City. And because of this, I'm actually questioning, how did Ada actually escape Raccoon City if she was like deep underground? Anyways, sorry, I have to apologize. I honestly was losing track of everything I wanted to say about this game, or just sounded really confusing. I feel like my way of expressing like the stuff I write comes off really confusing to a lot of people. I just enjoyed so much both of these scenarios that I forgot to take notes while playing, and I think that's the biggest flaw in my video making process. I literally don't take notes if I'm so sucked into a game. And earlier I mentioned losing footage that I recorded, and I could not determine what I said while playing these games to try to figure out how I was feeling at the time. Also, add the fact that I got sick around this time too, and there were some moments where I was just like too unwell to get out of bed, and that lasted for like about a week. And on my backlogged account, it says I started playing Resident Evil 2 on May 29th, and I didn't finish until my stream on June 12th. The game was really fun though, and I loved it, and I love the remake still too, but if you were to give me the option, I would choose the original now. I can say without a doubt now that the original Resident Evil 2 takes the spot as my second favorite Resident Evil game, but I feel that the unfortunate timing of just like me being sick and like a bunch of other like things in my life just made it really hard for this video to be written. So I feel like everything I said about Resident Evil 2 is just an understatement to how I really feel about it. Well, everything except for my disliking towards Remake Birkin now, cause like, why did the remake make me fight him so many times as both characters at the exact same time and place each time? That didn't even make any sense. You can actually track where each individual character is based off the timeline of events in both of the campaigns in the original. Like what? Did he fall off of like the little railing and then come back when like the other character came? No! Anyways, I think it's time I talk about the game that shocked me the most, Resident Evil 3, which I streamed on this channel for the next 2 days after beating Resident Evil 2. But before that, I wanted to give a brief thank you to everyone who actually stopped by to watch the streams and helped me out. Without you guys, I probably would have taken twice as long to beat the games. And there were a lot of details and just things in general I wouldn't have noticed without you guys, thus making the experience a lot more enjoyable because I got to play it with all of you. So again, thank you to all these nice folks and everyone else who dropped by. Anyways, back to the video. As someone who came from the remakes before playing the originals, my initial impressions so far have been that Resident Evil 1 was highly respected in its remake. It added more to the original game throughout the layout and the lore additions and whatnot. Resident Evil 2 is a great game that provides 4 different experiences based off the order you decide to play the scenarios, but the developers missed the mark when trying to remake the game. It screams high ambitions, but it's And, you know, I guess the remake is pretty good for what it is, but it lacks the proper execution to make the game hit the same highs and lows like the original did. And then there's Resident Evil 3, and I honestly can't even call the remake the same game. It didn't just miss the mark, it wasn't even aiming at the right target. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis takes place in the Raccoon City incident and follows Jill Valentine over the course of a couple days. Her adventure starts before the events of Resident Evil 2 and end about a day or two after Resident Evil 2. In the opening cutscene, rather than being this riot, which to me didn't really make sense when I played the remake, is instead replaced with this horrifying scene where we witness the residents of Raccoon City being overwhelmed by hordes of zombies eating everyone. The residents are overwhelmed by this evil. Even Jill's starting point was different. Instead of being chased by Nemesis from the get-go, we see her getting blown out of an exploding apartment building and jumping straight into the action from this little tutorial street area to kind of teach you how to shoot. Because shooting's kind of different in this game. You don't have to worry about where you're aiming because Jill will automatically turn and aim for whatever's closest to her. She eventually makes her way to a warehouse where she meets a man named Dario, just an ordinary salesman who lost his wife and daughter in this tragedy, and in his grief and fear locks himself inside of a shipping container. This was the last part of the game that was majorly the same between the remake and the original, aside from, you know, the crafting and dodging mechanics, but I'll get to that later. In the remake, Jill was confined to only following a linear path. Meanwhile, in the original, you're kind of free to explore the streets however you'd like. Of course, I'm not calling the game open, I'm just saying the game is a little bit more freeing in the way you'd like to progress. And I thought that freedom of exploring the streets was what made this game stand out compared to the other games where you were basically inside of like this one big building or one big property. But the chat made me aware from the start that what makes this game special is that there is a lot of RNG, so not all playthroughs would always be the same. And by a lot of RNG, I mean things like the grenade launcher and Magnum locations having a 50% chance of swapping with each other. And there are also enemy spawns and ammo locations and health locations that aren't really set. And there are some puzzle solutions that were completely random, and aside from the RNG, when you eventually reach the police station and you meet Nemesis for the first time, he kills Brad. He was the first real stalker enemy in the franchise. He wasn't exclusive to this room, he actively pursues you, and at such high speeds too. If he knocks you down, you have to like press the move button and spam every button on the controller if you want to get up in time before he picks you up again and slams you back down to the floor. But along with Nemesis, another element is introduced to this game, a choice. One that impacts different parts of the game. The wiki calls it the live selection. Your first encounter with Nemesis prompts the first live selection in the game, whether you'll fight him or run away. But regardless of which option you choose, Jill will still need to get a STARS ID card in order to progress. Nemesis is what's known as a damage sponge, meaning he takes a long amount of time to beat because he has a massive amount of health, just like every other stalker type enemy in the franchise. So I chose to run away into the police station, which in this game you only explore the west wing, or part of it rather, in order to get Jill's STARS ID card. But if you decide to take him on and beat him with your weak starter weapons, you can actually get Brad's STARS ID card instead. But there's actually a third outcome if you fail to make a choice in time or just choose not to. In this case, he'll hurt Jill and it'll play out like the fighting option, but honestly, the third choice is always more of a punishment than an actual, like, choice. Since I went through this game completely blind, at the time, I was genuinely shocked at the potential of replayability this game had. And just wondering how many variations of this game really are there if you take into account the amount of choices you have, along with the RNG. I really think it's just amazing that there's randomness to things that affect the gameplay and choices that affect the story. You have another one of these choice moments shortly after continuing forward. Jill makes her way from uptown to downtown, dodging dogs and these spider things until she makes her way to this restaurant where she meets Carlos for the first time, a member of Umbrella's Biohazard Countermeasure Service. But the introductions are interrupted by Nemesis and another live selection moment where you are given the option to hide in the restaurant basement or hide in the kitchen. I chose to hide in the basement. A pipe will burst and the whole place will start flooding, and I went back up the ladder after the building exploded because you could hear like an explosion sound or something. If you hide in the kitchen, Jill will directly cause an explosion, and if you choose nothing, you fight Nemesis again and try running away or try beating him. It's up to you. This is one of those choices that affect the story, because I went to the basement. That means later I'll meet Carlos again at a gas station and meet Nikolai, the game's other antagonist, in the sales office. The same thing would occur if I went to the other option instead. There are a total of 10 live selections throughout the whole game, and I think this video is already long enough without me covering all 30 choices and their outcomes, so I'll only be going over the choices that I went with in my first playthrough. So I'd highly recommend you'd play the game for yourself on GOG to experience this for yourself and, you know, tell your own story. I'd like to know what your own preferred route was. I would love to hear about your first playthrough or your preferred playthrough. Anyways, after meeting Carlos's platoon leader, Mikhail Victor, they decide to work together to make their way to Raccoon City's clock tower, since it's the location of the landing zone for their helicopter. However, they need to find a few things to get their ride working again. It's a cable car that you need to fix. In the remake, first you had to get the power station working again, and then you had to go to the train station to reroute all the subway trains. And honestly, I am glad they didn't include that, because as much as I really liked the little puzzle for rerouting all the trains, I thought that power section was just kind of weird. I honestly didn't need to see those spider things do that to Jill at the start. After backtracking and getting all the parts we need for the cable car, as well as getting chased by Nemesis, we eventually get the cable car working again, and I knew just from my experience with the remake they were probably gonna get Nemesis to show up here again and cause the whole thing to crash. At first, I wasn't really surprised, and also I didn't really see a point to the next live selection where it was telling me whether or not I wanted to hit the brakes or jump out the window, so I hit the brakes without question. But this was when I first learned about the real impact about these choice things. Earlier, I didn't know how impactful the choices you make were. During the live stream, someone explained to me that if I jumped out the window, you would have just ended up in a different starting location. And honestly, in my first time playing the game, I regret not jumping out the window, because when you pull the brakes, you end up in this room filled with crows right outside the clock tower. And then I died and lost all my progress because of the crows, and I forgot that Jill auto-aims, so I lost like an hour of progress. But honestly, when I arrived at the clock tower, and if you're like me, someone who played the remake before the original, or just haven't played the original at all, you'd also probably feel upset about the revelation that there was an entire area cut out of the game. At this point, I was already thinking that the remake was a watered-down version of the original and lacking everything that made it special, but this place was honestly what made me change that entire perspective because of this change in scenery. Instead of having that dog nemesis fight, I love the dog nemesis fight, but honestly, like, this mini mansion-like building, it's just so much better in my opinion. Like, I feel like I'm getting a little taste of everything I liked from Resident Evil 1 and 2, plus the new stuff I'm loving about 3 by the time I reached the clock tower. I also liked everything in the clock tower, like the following sequences of puzzles, which I totally didn't make my chat struggle to watch me solve. Nemesis shooting down the helicopter and like the way that the fight played out and Jill getting infected, I like the way it played out here more than it did in the remake. I even enjoyed the following segments, from when Carlos puts Jill in the chapel and then goes off to the hospital to try to find a cure. And I really loved that when you're in the hospital and Carlos finds out that Nikolai is a traitor, Nikolai goes and sets off a bunch of C4s in the entrance of the hospital to try to kill him. After Jill receives the zombie cure, she makes her way to the nearby park to try to find another escape route instead of looking for Nest 2 in the hospital basement. I honestly thought Nest 2 was pretty cool in my first playthrough of the remake. Now in retrospect, I feel like it's kind of bland fan service. And this park was just way cooler. All these different areas I got to explore up to the point where it made Raccoon City feel more like a city that was lived in, along with some lore and story context and notes I'd find making you just aware of how much more influence Umbrella has over the city. Which I honestly think now, the remakes didn't really do a good job at showing you how influential Umbrella was, aside from these massive labs underground. It's one thing to read it in the lore and notes, but it's another thing to actually see it in execution and see it in the world around you. I think that's just good storytelling. On a bit of a side note, one of my favorite things about all these games is seeing the variations and evolutions of enemies across all the games, whether it be just a variant or just a different form of them. I love specifically the design of the hunters across the franchise, because they're like these reptile things, and as a Florida man, it's my obligation to love these walking gators. Even though they're technically amphibians, but in the park you encounter some more frog-like looking hunters, and I also love frogs, so hearing them doing these little croaking noises was kind of cute. At first, I thought that it was just like a subtle little background sound effect until I walked up to them and noticed, oh, those aren't sound effects. Those are sound effects coming from a hunter that I've never seen before. And my chat warned me that they're actually some of the strongest hunters in the game. Like they'll kill me even faster than the other ones, so I would always run past them or something like that. I don't entirely remember what my chat said. They just said that I would die if I didn't beat them quickly. So yeah, I thought these frog hunters were cute. What wasn't cute was this stupid worm boss that I honestly hated so much. It is one of my least favorite bosses in the whole franchise. I've died more to this boss than any other boss in any of the 7 games that I've beaten thus far. I haven't even died that much in the 3 other games I haven't beat yet. And the way you have to beat it is that you have to push these lampposts onto a puddle to electrocute it, and then it'll get a lot of damage done to it. But after you finally put that thing in the ground, Jill makes her escape to an abandoned factory. I thought was just really weird that it was right next to a public park. But as a fellow American, I shouldn't have been surprised that there's a factory right next to a public park. To get to the factory, you have to cross a rope bridge with another Nemesis encounter and live selection. I really enjoyed Nemesis in this game. Throughout every encounter, I have loved it. And I love how threatening and scary he actually is compared to the remake. And I decided to push him off the bridge because I just thought it would be really funny. Whether you decide to push him off or make Jill jump off, this choice will determine where Jill will start out in the factory, the 2nd floor or the 1st floor. I thought this was just going to be a generic, tightly spaced factory with a bunch of zombies inside. However, Umbrella running this city means of course this place is supposed to be connected to them in some way. In this case, the factory is one of their disposal facilities for their bio-experiments. I like the detail of all the zombies in this place kind of looking half burnt or melted. The goal now is to make your way to a helicopter located in the factory. If you jumped off the bridge earlier, you would have to fight Nikolai, who steals the helicopter himself. However, since I pushed Nemesis off the bridge, this encounter will play out a lot differently. Instead, you find Nikolai in the factory and he gets mangled up in the ceiling by Nemesis right outside a boss fight with him. But the thing about this boss fight is you have to face Nemesis in his 2nd form inside of one of those disposal rooms. You have to beat him within 4 minutes or else Jill will get disposed of. Because beating Nemesis means he'll meet an acid-filled demise, I assumed this was the end of him, since at this point he hadn't taken on that dog form like in the remakes, and my chat was making fun of it, so that kind of reassured me this would be the end of him. On top of that, the final escape sequence was about to trigger, and that meant that the missile was going to hit Raccoon City. I let my guard down, thinking he's not going to come back, especially in this room, because there was a tyrant that looked like Mr. X that distracted me for a bit, and I thought to myself, oh, that's a cool little Easter egg right before the end. I wonder how that connects to RE2, and then Nemesis dropped from the ceiling. The only thing that's the same between this final boss fight and the remake is the fact that you have to push in these power source things to power a super weapon, but different in the fact that it's actually challenging and actually came as a more positive shock than feeling like an unnecessary hassle. If you haven't already noticed, I'm someone who's very particular about my taste in what I consider entertaining, and honestly, the massive wall of Nemesis in the remake was kind of boring in my opinion. I mean, he had a cool design, but other than that, it just felt like a roadblock. This here, it felt like a roadblock, but like a fun challenge, like a final duel. And I genuinely thought that was cool. And for me personally, as badass as the remake's defeat of Nemesis was, with Jill putting the railgun straight through him, I found Jill finishing off here in the original much more entertaining and satisfying. Sure, the big laser was cool and all, but I personally like it more when the human character on their own can finish off this big monster threat. And yeah, I know the railgun had a big part in weakening him, but Jill, dodging his acid spray, picking up her gun and then firing shot after shot, and slowly walking up to him until she dropped that iconic line.
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
It was just mwah, wonderful. Jill and Carlos eventually make their way to the helicopter and the two of them escape together. Although that's not the true ending to my surprise. The true ending would have been determined with my choice on the bridge earlier, and it would have led to Barry saving the duo. And speaking of Barry, if you want to learn about why he showed up here, you'd have to unlock the epilogues. There are 8 total epilogues, and you unlock them for each time you beat the game. They serve to tell you what happened to our heroes throughout all the games in the trilogy. Barry was actually planning on going to Raccoon City to help his fellow STARS members during the outbreak. After his whole "let's go take down Umbrella" speech, Leon makes Claire go away so she can look for her brother. That leads Leon and Sherry to get interrogated by the government, and Leon becomes an agent in exchange for Sherry's safety, while Sherry is upset to not only losing her family, but also losing her new friend Claire. We see Ada reflecting on the scars left behind both physically and emotionally by her mission in Raccoon City. And finally, our duo from the first game, Chris in Europe investigating Umbrella, and in a separate epilogue, Jill searching for him after finding out he got kidnapped. So after playing through the entire trilogy, I honestly really liked them. I thought people were exaggerating about how great the games were, and I'd only really liked them because they were similar to what I grew up with, but I really like them for what they are. And 2 and 3 have honestly become some of my favorite games in the whole franchise. And because of how hyped you guys in the live chat got me to play the other games, I decided to buy all the other games in the franchise, except 7 and 8 because they weren't on sale. Now all of you are going to start thinking I'm purposely avoiding playing 7 and 8. I'm not, I'm just broke, bro. And now that I've played the original games, I can say that I honestly understand why people dislike the remakes so much. Resident Evil 1's remake, no one has ever, I've never heard anyone say anything bad about it at all. And I honestly recommend you play Resident Evil 1's remake over the original. And it wasn't rewriting or reimagining anything, it just added to what was already there. But the remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3 are completely different. For Resident Evil 2's remake, I still stand by what I said in my other video. It feels like I'm watching a movie where the director couldn't decide who he wanted to cast as the main role, and instead of making a cohesive story with every variation of the scenarios, they decided to just spend the rest of their budget reshooting the same movie twice. And now the remake of Resident Evil 3 just feels empty and bland, and now I understand firsthand the disappointment of its wasted potential. However, I still think the remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3 are good on their own if you detach them from the originals. I don't hate them, I just wish that they did a better job. Anyways, with all that being said, every comparison and detail I mentioned throughout this video are just some of the things I noticed while playing. I did forget to mention earlier in the video that if you'd like to see my raw reaction to some of these moments, I actually plan on uploading a supercut of my entire playthrough of the trilogy on my second channel. And, you know, maybe a couple days after this video comes out, because I've had so much trouble just making this, and this video took a lot longer than I thought. I literally thought, like, oh yeah, it's Resident Evil's original games. I bet they don't have that many things to them. This is going to be like a 10-minute video. And I was wrong, because these games are packed with content, and I love them so much, and I really want to replay 3 again. But I have to make this video come out first. Anyways, with all that being said, I'm going to go back to working on my Zelda video. Thank you for watching, everyone. Good night, God bless, and I'll see you all in the next one.